Hey y'all, I'm the Captain, and this is Sailing on the Spectrum, where I talk about the challenges growing up with autism spectrum disorder. Welcome aboard. Today I want to talk about the issue of routine and the necessity of routine for people on the spectrum. Routines and adapting to changes. Those are things that are another characteristic of people on the spectrum is observed to be anyways, is that they are a lot of them are very rigidly uh, insistent and in need of rigid and consistent routines in their daily lives in order to be able to function at their best or be at their best. I think in general, people need routine and consistency and reliability in their lives to be at their best. But with those on the spectrum, it certainly is even in a more a heightened and an accelerated sense. We on the spectrum certainly are can be very sensitive to certain stimuli, and oftentimes environmental changes, even changes in, let's say, the weather or temperature sometimes, can really affect us and make us uncomfortable. That's not true in the same way for everybody on the spectrum. You can't just line them all up on a line and expect them to react exactly the same way to everything you throw at them. But there may be some who that might affect the majority of them, but still, changes in general, and especially in unpredictability and routines, can be things that can cause heightened anxiety, and even heightened sensitivity. The snowball effect can occur when that takes place in the life of someone who is on the spectrum. I know in my case, a lot of times in my life, when there were big changes on the horizon or just about to be big changes, I found myself to react to them in ways that sometimes either involved a high anxiety, or once the change took place, it involved sometimes a plummet into depression. I have another video out about anxiety and depression on the spectrum, and a lot of this can tie in with some of that and be a cause of it. It's not the only cause, but changes and routine and unpredictability is something that can, in my case, certainly have that type of effect on it. For me, the changes that would take place in routine, weren't all, it wasn't like, I would go to the way it worked for me was, it wasn't like I would go to my desk, let's say in school or something like that, and I wouldn't get to sit at exactly the same desk. It wasn't that type of thing. It wasn't like borderline obsessive compulsive disorder. The routines, and I guess if you say quirks that are associated with that, are even more rigid and more specific, to the point of just really specific. Like, I guess the ways that counting how many times you chew your food, that kind of stuff. It's just all I don't know enough to really know the best way to describe OCD. I just know that it doesn't have to coexist, although it might, but it doesn't have to coexist, and it doesn't have to be a cause. One doesn't have to be a cause of the other. OCD and Asperger's or autism spectrum, it doesn't work like that. Usually things like the routines and the consistently for which we long is just simply, sometimes it can be a little bit more generalized, but still very important to us. But in my case, the kind of changes I talk about are things like that are pretty big, usually pretty big changes to which, I guess, so-called typical individuals can adapt to fairly easily without too much difficulty, or at least overcome the difficulties pretty quickly. With me, I remember starting to go to regular school. I was homeschooled for kindergarten and kindergarten and first grade, just at home by my mom. I went to a public school in second grade. Those years, first few years of elementary school were very, very challenging and difficult. They brought about changes that were traumatic in many ways for me, and you would think that after maybe a year, after, or even after days or weeks of going through it, that it would just, that I would adjust and just be fine with it. It wasn't that simple. Just the constant day in and day out barrage of being around people and teachers and dealing with kids, peers, and so many kids and so many people on a daily basis just would deplete me over time. And, you know, that ties in again with some anxiety and depression, you know, not just in kids, but certainly in those who are developing as adolescents and adults. And I think as adults, you know, sometimes they may be, in some ways, be more vulnerable because they may be thought to somehow have overcome whatever issues that supposedly they would have had in childhood when they were on the spectrum. And that's just not the case. It's a shame that a lot of the things that are aids and how do I say it, are helps for people who are on the spectrum just completely stop by the time you're finished with your supposedly with your education after college. You know, all those programs and things like that. And for adults, you know, you're kind of left to fend. I know that when I guess actually when I left that elementary school and started into a middle school, it actually, in that case, the change was a little bit better, although there was still a new set of challenges, and that presented new problems and more mountains to climb. And, you know, after climbing so many mountains in your life, and especially in your growing up years, you just feel like you're always going to be running uphill. I know that when I went through high school, I had been with the same group of kids for a lot, for a large extent through most of middle and high school. Then next thing you know, it seemed like by the time I was a senior in high school, I'd kind of arrived. Guess what? College. I graduate and go to college. I'm back like practically from square one. New environment, new teachers, new classes, new routine, you know, and I was able to adjust, but it was still kind of like just starting over, marching up the field and back. We actually, after my first year of college, my parents moved to Florida, far away from where I live in South Carolina, where I'd grown up, I mean. And even though I wasn't, you know, just about to turn 20 at that point, I certainly wasn't of the point where I felt like I could live on my own, and I just ended up moving with them, and I was just in a new environment. I wasn't in college. I was forced to have to go take a job, and that is another big, you know, set of challenges if you're on the spectrum. I remember being back. We moved back to South Carolina a couple years later. I remember feeling great about it, and I remember, you know, being back in college again, and then I end up finishing college. But sure enough, by the time college was ending, I remember getting very depressed again. And a lot of it has to do with just the impendingness of change and feeling like you've got to be ready for the next step. And it's like, I haven't even mastered this step. You know, I was able to go to college, I was able to go to class, but I really didn't have a good career path. I really just was trying to make my way, get my sheet of paper in a folder that says I got a degree, and, you know, then voila, I'm an adult now, or supposed to be. And, you know, just, I ended up working somewhere for a good number of years, and guess what? I got married, and just 3 months after I got married, I got laid off. It was just terrible. And, you know, and looking back, I just wish I hadn't have been so... It's easy to sell myself short. I know that I could have done more to, you know, move past, you know, whatever changes I would have been hit with in my life. But I think if you're on the spectrum, those kinds of things are just not, they kind of deplete you. They deplete, I think really, they deplete certain levels of body chemistry that are tied in your brain, that of which some people seem to have a bigger reserve, but certainly us on the spectrum don't have as big a reserve, and it's harder to build it back up. It ties a lot in changes in your life of all kinds, and not just changes in environment, but of any kind, no matter what the issue of change may be. If it's just general routine when you're as a child, or just certain things you do, morning rituals, or other things like that. It has to do with a way of feeling like you're in more of your control of your surroundings, feel like you're able to adjust and hide your weaknesses a little better, and your idiosyncrasies a little better. And when things are changing around you and you feel like you have to change with them, and you're just not ready to adapt as quick, then you feel like you feel more self-conscious and more exposed and more vulnerable to getting the finger pointed at you, for not conforming. And, I think that's just something that, I don't know, maybe it's a kind of an indictment against our world. I talk about this in our video on anxiety and depression, that we're constantly being told to adjust and adapt on a constant basis and almost without notice. We're told to keep moving, to be as productive as we can, not in the sense of being, we're not even told that having friends and investing our time and energy in them and talking with them and is really being productive. We're just told that, getting our clock in, clock out, and making those, I don't know if in the office, if the movie Office Space, what's his name, Lumbergh, the boss comes by and keeps pestering whoever it is to get those TPS reports, holding his cup of coffee. You got to get those TPS reports like we talked about, and that just seems to be it's that kind of attitude, just, what have you done for me lately, kind of thing. It just seems like that the world is set up to do that. And having issues with consistency and routine in your life seems like something that the world doesn't have time for. But it seems like more and more that people in general, and certainly people on the spectrum, can't afford not to take time for that. And it's important to, as always, if you're somebody who has a loved one who's on the spectrum, or if you have students who are on the spectrum, or if you have employees who are on the spectrum, you need to be mindful in their case, not in a overly pandering or patronizing way. You just need to be mindful that there are people, and that even people in general need to have consistency and predictability in their lives to be able to function and perform the way that they can best. And I think for those on the spectrum, you're just going to have to concede that it is really the best for them and for everybody if they're able to do the best they can for themselves, if they can have an environment where they're safe, where things are safe enough to have their distresses reduced and their feelings and their needs addressed. And I think that really the idea of routine and adapting to change is just something that really requires a real rethinking of our culture and our beliefs and our priorities. And I hope that if I'm as a person on the spectrum, I'm somebody who can illustrate that and understand and help people understand why it's really important, not just for individuals on the spectrum to be able to have the needs met that they need, to be able to have their routines, their, be made as consistent as they can be it work routine, be it school routine, or just daily routines around the house. It's important for that to be something that is at least respected. And at the same time, we on the spectrum need to be sure that our adaptation, that we're doing what we can to adapt as best we can, but that also that we, as I keep saying over and over again in a lot of videos, advocate for ourselves. That means speak up. That's something that's hard to do, but maybe you can find professionals who can. And I'll try to put links in the description who can to people who can help you, organizations that can get you connected. Because professional advocacy, even though it seems sparse, it's out there. And the more we raise our voice, even if it isn't our actual voice, the more we call attention to ourselves, the better it can be handled, and the better we can improve our world. This is the Captain, and I'll see you on our next voyage. And be sure to like, comment, and subscribe.